Authorized drivers who fail to provide the required physical qualification documents will not be permitted to drive an Aramark commercial motor vehicle or any other CMV within the scope of their employment with Aramark, and may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination. Authorized drivers who fail to meet the physical qualification requirements of this policy and the FMCSRs will not be permitted to operate an Aramark commercial motor vehicle. Determinations about continued employment and driving capacity will be made by the appropriate line manager in conjunction with the appropriate human resources professional. Authorized drivers must immediately notify their managers if they no longer meet the physical qualification required by the FMCSR. Failure to notify management will result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. Controlled substance and alcohol testing, CDL authorized drivers. General provisions. All authorized drivers who operate CMVs that require a CDL are subject to the FMCSA's controlled substance and alcohol regulations. All authorized drivers who operate CMVs that require a CDL, their managers, and the applicable BU will be responsible to comply with the Aramark CMV controlled substance and alcohol testing policy. If applicable, Aramark will provide testing for the CDL authorized driver that is in compliance with all federal and state laws and regulations. The company will retain all records related to testing and the testing process in a secure and confidential manner. Aramark has retained J.J. Keller to maintain all testing records required under this section. CDL authorized drivers will not use, have possession of, abuse, or have the presence of alcohol or any controlled substance in excess of regulation established threshold levels while on duty. The CDL authorized driver will not use alcohol within 4 hours of performing a safety-sensitive function, while performing a safety-sensitive function, or immediately after performing a safety-sensitive function. For the avoidance of doubt, the presence in the CMV of unmanifested alcohol, whether the item is an alcohol product, for example a bottle or other container of beer, or a product with a DOT prescribed maximum alcohol content, for example a bottle of mouthwash or NyQuil, is a violation of this policy. Post-accident testing for CDL authorized drivers. CDL authorized drivers are to notify their manager or supervisor as soon as possible if they are involved in an accident. If the accident involves a fatality, next slide, a bodily injury with immediate medical treatment away from the scene and the driver received a citation or disabling damage to any motor vehicle requiring towaway and the driver received the citation, the CDL authorized driver will be tested for controlled substances and alcohol as soon as possible following the accident. The CDL authorized driver must remain readily available for testing. If the CDL authorized driver is not readily available for alcohol and controlled substance testing, he or she may be deemed as refusing to submit to testing. Reasonable suspicion testing for CDL authorized drivers. Aramark will conduct reasonable suspicion testing if there is a reason to believe that a CDL authorized driver has violated the DOT regulations or the Aramark motor vehicle policy or accompanying implementation procedures. The decision to test will be made by a trained supervisor or manager after appropriate inquiry, investigation, and consultation with the appropriate human resources and labor relations, if applicable, professional. The decision will be based on objective facts or circumstances that would lead a reasonable person to believe a CDL authorized driver has violated the regulations, policy, or procedures. As part of the Aramark CMV controlled substance and alcohol testing policy, authorized drivers, their managers, and other appropriate personnel within the BU will receive training on detecting possible violations of the Aramark drug testing and alcohol testing policy, the basis for forming a reasonable suspicion that such policy has been violated. Random testing for CDL authorized drivers. Aramark will conduct random testing for all CDL authorized drivers based on a scientifically valid method in accordance with the FMCSR. A company-approved third-party vendor will administer the random testing program, maintaining all pertinent records on random tests administered. At least 10% of the average number of CDL driver positions will be tested for alcohol each year. At least 50% of the average number of CDL driver positions will be tested for controlled substances each year. The random testing will be spread reasonably throughout the calendar year. All random alcohol and controlled substance tests will be unannounced, with each driver having an equal chance of being tested each time selections are made. A CDL authorized driver may only be tested for alcohol while he or she is performing a safety-sensitive function, just before performing a safety-sensitive function, or just after completing a safety-sensitive function. Next slide. Once notified that he or she has been randomly selected for testing, the CDL authorized driver must proceed immediately to the assigned collection site. Refusal to submit. A CDL authorized driver may not refuse to submit to a post-accident random or reasonable suspicion test required by the regulations. A CDL authorized driver may not refuse to participate in any follow-ups. Refusal to submit includes failing to provide adequate breath or urine sample for alcohol or controlled substance testing and any conduct that obstructs the testing process. This includes adulteration or tampering with a urine or breath sample. This also includes refusal to participate in any follow-up activity. Specimen collection will be conducted in accordance with any applicable law. A controlled substance testing custody and control form will be used to document the chain of custody from the time the specimen is collected at the testing facility until it is tested in the laboratory. Driver log procedures. All Aramark authorized CMV drivers are required to comply with the applicable driver's hours of service timekeeping procedure as required in the FMCSR. All Aramark CMV drivers must complete a logbook or time card and send it in weekly to J.J. Keller. All managers of CMV drivers are responsible for ensuring their drivers do not violate any hours of service regulations. Any violations identified must be promptly addressed and corrected. Forms necessary to collect hours of service are available on the Fleet Department website or from J.J. Keller. Daily Vehicle Inspection Reports. All Aramark CMV drivers are required to complete a daily vehicle inspection report each time they drive a CMV. Oncoming drivers must review the previous inspection report and ensure any defects have been corrected prior to driving the vehicle. Each driver must complete a DVIR at the completion of their shift. Any defects noted on the DVIR must be brought to the attention of the manager and promptly repaired. DVIRs do not need to be filled out if the vehicle has not been used on a particular day. However, it will be the manager's responsibility to notify J.J. Keller of the days the vehicle is not in use. DVIRs should only be retained for 90 days and then destroyed. Approved DVIR forms are available from J.J. Keller. Passengers. Next slide. Passengers may not be under the age of 18. Passengers must be for business purposes only. All non-employee passengers must execute a ride-along agreement. The ride-along must be provided by the location manager of the CMV driver, and the approval must be date-specific and not be open-ended. A copy of this agreement is attached to this policy. Seatbelts. Authorized drivers and authorized passengers in an Aramark CMV are required to wear a seatbelt. Vehicle safety equipment. Authorized drivers are required to make sure that the Aramark CMV which they operate has at all times the following vehicle safety equipment. In the event that the CMV does not have the required equipment, authorized drivers are required to notify the location manager or supervisor or the Fleet Services Department. Every Aramark CMV must be equipped with the following: seat belts, passenger jump seats, Whenever an authorized passenger is transported in an Aramark vehicle, the passenger must be equipped with safety belts. Fire extinguisher, properly filled and located so that it is readily accessible, securely mounted, and maintained to permit visual determination of whether it is fully charged. The extinguisher must contain an extinguishing agent that does not need protection from freezing. Warning devices for stopped vehicles. 3 bidirectional emergency reflective triangles. First aid kit. Emergency accident report kit. Vehicle insurance identification card. Any other emergency equipment required for the vehicle by the applicable federal, state, or local law or regulation, for example, snow chains. WEX fuel card. Next slide. Vehicle maintenance. Vehicles that fall under the scope of this policy must at all times be properly maintained as designated by the Fleet Services Department. All maintenance must be completed by the vendor provided by the Fleet Services Department. Any exceptions must be approved by Fleet Services prior to service. The vehicle shall be kept in a clean, safe, and serviceable condition at all times. The authorized driver shall be held liable for any renovations, repairs, or reconditioning charged back to the company at any time the vehicle is traded in, provided that renovations, repairs, or reconditioning are deemed to have resulted from negligence, abuse, or unauthorized modifications. Authorized drivers may not modify the Aramark CMV mechanically, including but not limited to tampering with a vehicle speed governor. Note, radios are permitted only on approval of your manager and the Fleet Services Department. To ensure the professional appearance of Aramark CMVs, employees must not display decals or other ornamentation not issued by Aramark other than regulatory stickers. Unauthorized cargo. Cargo which has not been authorized by the manager may not be transported by an authorized driver of an Aramark CMV. Accidents and moving violations involving Aramark commercial motor vehicles. Authorized drivers are required to immediately report all accidents involving an Aramark CMV regardless of fault, cost of repairs, or extent of injuries or damage to the appropriate governmental authorities prior to leaving the scene of an accident. Further, the authorized driver should obtain the names and telephone numbers of all parties and witnesses involved in the accident. Authorized drivers must report all accidents and moving violations to their manager or supervisor by the next reporting workday of the accident or moving violation. The manager or supervisor must inform their operations vice president, human resource vice president, and Fleet Services Department of any accident and consult for appropriate action. In addition, authorized drivers must complete an Aramark vehicle accident report for all accidents. All CMV drivers involved in an accident that results in a fatality, injury, or requires any vehicle being towed from the scene will not be allowed to drive an Aramark CMV until a full and complete investigation has been completed by, next slide,